Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's West London Economic Prosperity Board meeting, hosted and facilitated by Ealing Council and held in Ealing Town Hall. Before I move on to the first item of the agenda, which is the appointment of the chair for 2023-2024, can I just mention to all attendees and participants, when speaking for the purposes of the stream to YouTube, please use the microphones provided when speaking. Thank you. So I'd now like to
There you go. Thank you, Cornelia. Can I nominate Councillor Peter Mason, the chair?
second that. Thank you very much. The meeting is resolved to appoint Councillor Peter Mason as chair for 2023 to 2024. And I'd like to now hand over the chairing of the meeting to Councillor Mason.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad you've done that, because otherwise I'd have had to move, and it would have rather upset the place names that we so diligently prepared. So I'll echo Cornelia's thanks and welcome you to the West London Economic Prosperity Board. If it's okay with the committee, what we'll do is defer the decision on vice chair until a future meeting. That'll just give us an opportunity to have a few conversations and just make sure that we're aligned with some of the broader changes that I think we're discussing, aren't we, soon in the context of the wider West London Alliance. Apologies for absence, Cornelia.
I didn't get formal apologies for absence from any members as such. I know some chief executives notified us that they wouldn't be coming, but not from them.
No worries. So hopefully Stephen and Paul will be joining us shortly, no doubt. The as is always the case, if it's too cold or it's too warm, British public transport struggles. So hopefully they'll be joining us soon. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations? Don't believe there are. Minutes of the previous meeting. So sort of the most recent meeting was on February the 20th, or was in February of 2022. And I appreciate that there are some changes since then, but I think from my recollection, the minutes are broadly accurate. So if people are happy to agree, then agreed. Thank you. Appointment of the chair of the West London Skills and Economy Employment Board, even. If he's happy to do it, I'd like to nominate Councillor Barry Rawlings. Is there a second? That's seconded by Councillor Rajawat. So Barry, you happy to take up that honour? There was a thumbs up and a nod, so that is hopefully agreed. State of the West London economy, David.
Morning all. The copy of the report was circulated with the papers. The report provides headline numbers on the West London economy. It also provides stats on deprivation and net zero, which relates to the double and interrelated challenge of tackling inequality and climate change in West London. And then it drills down into into 4 focus areas, which are employment, business, neighbourhood and connectivity. The employment and connectivity are both covered on this agenda, so we can say a little bit more about those then. Rather than go through the slide deck, I just want to pull out some key points. So we had the 2021 census, and that's recorded that the population in West London is now over 2 million. It's gone up by 180,000, which is an increase of 9.2%, which compares to a London increase of 7.7%. And if West London was a region on its own, it would have outpaced every other region in the country. The next highest is 8.3% increase. We've got 69,000 people unemployed in May 2023. That compares to 39,000 in December 2019 and 68,000 in February 2023. So there's been a slight increase over that period in the last couple of months up to May. There are over 115,000 businesses in West London, with around 90% employing fewer than 9 people. And there are around 930,000 jobs in the region as at May 2021, which is about 17% of the London total. Health and social care and transport and logistics are the 2 largest employment sectors, at around about 10%. But we've also got a large presence of media, film and screen, which is about 3.2% of employees across West London, compared to about 0.5% nationwide. Heavy concentrations in Hounslow and Hammersmith and Fulham. A couple of other key points just to finish. Heathrow passenger numbers are back to pre-pandemic levels, with almost 7 million passengers in May. And relating to the net zero challenge, the Mayor's Pathway to Net Zero talks about a 27% reduction in car vehicle travel. The average percentage of car travel relative to other modes of transport in West London is, the average travel by car relative to other modes of transport across London is 34%. All of the boroughs, with the exception of, in West London, with the exception of Hammersmith and Fulham, which is at 20%, are above that average of 34%, and the highest is Hillingdon at 56%. So those are some of the key points, and just in terms of just my closing point before I invite any questions and comments. I would really welcome sort of your comments and questions on the points that I've highlighted, or indeed on the report more generally. And also bear in mind that over the next couple of months, myself and the new AD for Economy, who's starting in a couple of weeks, will be looking to refine this report and improve it, working with WA colleagues and borough colleagues. So any comments you've got on the structure or the content would also be welcome.
Thank you very much, David. I think to sort of kick off, hopefully, at least a brief discussion, the fundamental question with the state of the economy is, okay, so what? Right. So what? Right. Great, Heathrow's back to passenger numbers. We know that they're still slightly behind with freight, and we can see the shifting patterns in the economy. But what does that mean for us, and what do we do collectively as a group of local authorities to both analyse but then also to act? And I think actually it's interesting for me, the comparative analysis between what's happening in outer London and inner. If you look at some of that census data, which is partly around population shift, but also demographic shift. So we as outer London are now becoming demographically younger, whilst inner London is becoming demographically older. We see our school numbers in some areas increasing, if not staying static, whilst in inner London we see local authorities having to shut down schools because there simply aren't any pupils to fill them. And what we also see are shifting patterns in both employment and travel and commuting behaviour that actually has an awful lot of people spend more of their times in their local neighbourhoods and their communities than ever before. And what certainly for me it does is it arrests the notion that probably has been around for quite a long time, and to some extent has become a bit of the London narrative, that the future is the continued sort of agglomeration of wealth and prosperity in central London, and that we as suburban boroughs surrounding it are subservient to it. And that the aim of the game should be expensive bits of infrastructure like Crossrail that sort of send people from expensive flats in Hayes and Southall into central London, where they can sort of work in their expensive office buildings, and that we send the residents of other parts of our borough like Greenford, Northolt, and I'm sure I look to other colleagues who know exactly what I'm talking about in their own geographies to send them on the bus to go and clean those offices. And therefore, our challenge, I think, collectively is to set out a very different narrative about what we want for West London and about how we bring good jobs back to our town centres, but also into our urban locations. And so that actually that we have a bit more of a distributed model of growth in which we can bring prosperity, jobs, employment back to the outer London suburbs, and perhaps steal a bit of the good stuff that's happening in central London. So if it does mean that you know, you can have less fun in Soho because they're regulating against the nighttime economy, then fine, let that happen in Ealing and Wembley. If you know, we see shifts in patterns in which people want to you know, go to their offices along the M4 corridor or along the A40, let that happen, and let's think about how we can attract and encourage businesses to both set up and then employ local people. So certainly for me, as we look to sort of the Economic Prosperity Board and our agenda, and particularly as we start thinking of things like, for example, all of our upcoming inward investment projects, all of our work programme, that the central core mission should be growth and prosperity in our locations, and that we find a way of making that happen, and we shift the narrative that we're not simply a quiet dormitory to central London anymore, but we're our own place and we've got a future. So Sharma?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think the report's really interesting in terms of some of the key statistics that have been brought out. I think what will be really great in terms of the next step is understanding what are potential barriers for investment into the region and for businesses to come base themselves in our region. I know we locally we have conversations with developers who have office space or so on, and they're struggling to fill those spaces. Even the businesses are shifting from central London. So what is it that barriers for the region, for us in West London, to attract these businesses here, you know, to kind of help with our sustained growth? So that would be interesting to see, and even comparative between different boroughs to see, is there something that we can align ourselves between the 7 boroughs about how we compete or not compete with investment into the region?
Yeah, completely endorse what Councillor Taylor just said, and taking your point, Chair, I think there's some joint up working between our boards as well here, because I'm very conscious that a lot of the jobs that still exist, certainly in Hounslow, and I dare say it's across the piece, are often very low paying jobs, which don't have the skills and that sort of progression that you kind of need to make West London the place where you want to work long term as well. So there's perhaps some work that we can do across the board as West London leaders. So I completely endorse the views there. Just on something slightly different, obviously we're all sort of trying to get to grips with the net zero agenda, and part of that is the funding of it. And I know there's a lot of work going on outside around attracting funding that's sustainable, because we can't do it on our own, not individually, but also collectively as well. And I wonder if there's a role for us as the West London Alliance and the Economic Prosperity Board to try and leverage some of our influence and some of the great stats that are in here to say, actually, there is a good story here. Let's try and get some sustainable funding in here and attract some of that as well, because I think that's going to be a key agenda going forward.
Yeah, I've made a note of all those comments. The only point I would add is it's the attraction of business, but also retention as well, and growing. So I mean, as part of looking at those barriers, I'll be looking at kind of how some of the businesses grow and how we retain them as well.
Good. Okay. And of course, the key element to sort of growth is good orbital infrastructure, which probably takes us quite neatly onto the next agenda item. Is Niall?
No, he's online.
Oh, he's on now.
Yeah.
Is he online? So, Niall, I think you're going to present to us, aren't you, on the orbital rail and regeneration project?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. You have a paper before you which sets out the progress since you last received a report on this item, and it's been good progress, I'm pleased to say. I take your attention to section 2, where the partner oversight group is now been looking at what we need to do next in relation to key focused work on 2 elements, and there are subgroups being established to achieve that. The first is to look at stakeholder engagement. Importantly, this will be around government, other institutions, some of the organisations who are working on the investment profile and the investment requirement for projects such as the West London Orbital, particularly through the lens, for example, of climate change. So 3CI, the national organisation, as features the West London Orbital in one of its prospectuses as a good indication of investment, which will help with our net zero ambitions. The second one, obviously, that also includes the private sector. There's quite a considerable amount of private sector engagement and involvement that will be required as a result of the second part of the work, which is look at the funding and financing, the next steps in relation to not only developing the programme against its grip stages, but also in terms of how we're going to pay for this and what's the best mechanism to do that. I'm very pleased that to point out the members will note that the Greater London Authority, Transport for London and the boroughs are all working collaboratively and collectively on that work, and we'll be looking at some proposals for you in this calendar year, I'm hoping, to give an indication about where next we can go in relation to that funding and financing strategy. The final point, and it refers to some of the recommendations you've got, is to note some of the public affairs work that's been going on. You would have probably seen that the Mayor of London stated that this project is a good project and something which the Transport for London, the Mayoralty, wishes to support going forward. It would be excellent if members of the board could consider any other areas of focus for us in relation to our public affairs work around supporting the next steps in terms of the development of the WLO. In summary, Chair, I think we're making really good progress against the programme itself. You'll note that some of it's underspent really, but there will be some available resources for some of the further activity, particularly around master planning going forward, so we can clarify how that some of the funding and financing mechanisms could work. Very willing to take any comments or questions you may have, and I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I didn't put my mic on. Comments or questions? I don't see any, so I take that as read, and I think people are broadly content. I think we do have that interesting challenge of financing forward to think about. There is a discussion of now sort of 8 figures, and in the current context, the discussion about major infrastructure investment in London that isn't paid for by all of us ourselves is not exactly a conversation that's particularly easy in the current circumstance with DfT and with Treasury. So I think we're going to need to get our thinking caps on about how we can, how we can either make the case very, very clearly to government, or indeed how we will be able to sort of do this and progress this ourselves. But I think that we've got the actions therefore in the paper that sort of set out how we're going to give that a bit of oversight. But in the interim, very positive that there is the money from the SIP, and it's good that we are able to draw that down. And I think that's effectively what we're asking today. So if everybody's happy and agreed, we'll move forward. So Niall, thank you very much. David, we're going to go back over to you for the future of digital connectivity and benefits. Go for it.
Thank you. You've all seen the paper, and Finn Kelly, who leads the digital programme for the WLA, and Hannah Griffiths from Jacobs are going to take us through some slides just to bring the report off the page a little bit. This work is being done, as you'd expect, in partnership with all the WLA boroughs. There's been quite a lot of work over the last few months, and we're midway through this digital connectivity project, which is looking at the benefits of digital connectivity for West London. And it's linking to the existing WLA programme, which Finn will say more about, and then Hannah will talk us through where we're up to on the project itself. And then there'll be some questions which will come back to members at the end of the presentation.
Great, go for it. Yes.
Afternoon, everyone. Delighted to be here. Right. Afternoon, everyone. Delighted to be here. So our slides are just about the digital programme in West London, the work going on in David's team. And if we go to the first slide, please, Cornelia. We've got really effective collaboration going on in West London with your offices and all your boroughs for digital. At the moment, we've got a laser-like focus on residents' benefits, on business benefits of our work. We take the approach of splitting our work between the following three areas: digital place, digital council, and tackling digital exclusion. We have these three areas because it's a easy framework for us to structure our work and keep that focus on, how do we get the most out of digital infrastructure and technology for residents. In digital place, the focus of our work is around digital infrastructure, how we develop fast, secure networks and work with the private sector. Digital council, we work with all your officers and teams on how we can support you to, improve access to services for residents. And then for digital exclusion, a lot of the focus is around how we enable independent living and tackle inequality by promoting digital inclusion. So this gives us a kind of framing for how we approach the work. Next slide, please, Cornelia. And just to make the point that a lot of our work with your officers in your boroughs is around infrastructure, and this presentation today isn't about infrastructure. So we've got 9 million investment going into gigabit connections to our public buildings. That's attracting in investment from all the operators into areas which have been underserved historically. So we're helping address the issue of digital exclusion through lack of access to a fast network. We've got 137 street lighting assets in our expanding opportunities programme across all 7 boroughs. And that programme has made is making those assets available to the private sector so they can install equipment and make it easy for them to do so. So we get the benefits of connectivity more quickly for residents. We've got all 7 boroughs engaged across the WLA group. And we've got a real huge success story actually around the Wayleave programme in all boroughs. So we've got 41,000 connections over the past 3 years installed, new connections in our social housing blocks. So this is an effective partnership and effective collaboration around infrastructure. I think the focus on now is what do we do with this infrastructure and how do we tap into some of the capabilities that are being built. And this project, which Hannah will talk us through, is all about looking at those benefits and quantifying them. So over to you, Hannah.
Oh, thank you, Finn, and thank you very much for having me. So the aim of this project is to basically create an impact framework that will quantify the benefits and disbenefits of up to 10 connectivity use cases. And I'll give you some examples of what they might be in a second. But this slide just shows what we've done to date as part of this project. So we started with what we called challenge discovery. We did a lot of desktop research, some one-to-one interviews, a number of workshops. I think in total probably engaged over 100 people to really understand what are the challenges we need to solve for West London with connectivity. And over the last month, we've been then transforming those challenges into what are the solutions that we should select to then model that might resolve some of those challenges. And we're now just about to move into the impact modelling phase where we really start to scope the solutions and then really define what are the impacts, both positive and negative, that might arise as a result of them. And lastly, in parallel with that impact modelling activity, we'll be developing some supporting materials. So you'll have the framework, which will kind of spill out some numbers around what are the magnitude of the benefits. But in terms of supporting materials, we'll also talk about what are the barriers to implementation of these solutions, what are the critical success factors that must be in place. And we'll also produce some communication materials that can be used to explain to communities and businesses what these solution ideas are and how they might be of help to them. Next slide, please, Cordelia. So following our challenge discovery work, this graphic, which I think is also included in your pack, shows some of the challenge areas that were prioritised. So you'll see they were quite wide ranging. There were a number in adult services around pressure on the care resources, some in housing around quality of the living environment, particularly in relation to damp and mould, digital exclusion, both of those in deprived areas, but also of micro businesses. And then we moved into some of the economic growth challenges with high streets, kind of understanding more about the transport and mobility systems to be able to make decisions about how we make changes to that infrastructure in our local area. And then moving over to the net zero and environment area, how to reduce waste, increasing recycling, and yeah, enable a better circular economy. Next slide, please, Cordelia. So then, as I mentioned, we then flipped those challenges on their head and started to consider solutions. And these are just an example of a couple of the solutions that we're going to be taking forward into modelling. So in response to the adult social care challenges, we're going to be modelling some assistive and monitoring technologies. They might be things like voice prompts for those with memory challenges to remind them to turn off taps, turn off the oven, lock the door, things like that, but also monitoring of those individuals. Has their routine deviated? Therefore, should you go and check on them? In response to some of the housing and quality of the living environment challenges, some early damp and mold detection, thereby making it easier to resolve that issue before it gets too bad, but also mitigating some of the health issues that arise as a result of damp and mold. And the last example I'll talk through is the virtual skills hub. This is the use of technology to enable skills to be acquired more flexibly, and also learning of practical skills in different locations rather than having to go to a specific training centre, hopefully making it easier for people to acquire new skills and enter new professions. At this point, I'll stop and I'll hand over to David for any questions.
I'll put my mic on. Are there any key opportunities or risks associated with the challenges or solutions that you would like to highlight? Which impacts are you most interested in within the economic, social and environmental spheres? And how would you like to be involved going forwards?
Maybe just make a comment rather than a question, I think. So Luke Ward, Director of Brent Cross Regeneration at Barnet, substituting for Captain Shaw. Just really a comment on the sort of maybe borough perspective on the Whaley programme that Finn was talking about. It's been really valuable at a very practical level, certainly in Barnet. The model that we took, the sub-region model we took and applied, is well underway to connecting over half of our 8,000 Barnet homes have kind of social housing units. The market jumps in it effectively, so it's been a really good lever. And I suppose what it puts us in a position is thinking about what can we do more of that, how can we take that model when we can find the right questions, because actually we've got quite good real world numbers which kind of tick all the boxes, very inclusive, supporting growth, good rates as well, good kind of sort of well costed services for those residents. So really just a comment. I think it's been a really good programme. Very impressed.
Thank you. I guess a couple of points really. We've been rolling out sort of not using the main players with digital accessibility within Brent on our council housing estates. And we're also piloting a programme looking at using technology for damp and mould issues. And I was wondering whether there's been any work done or kind of scoping about what boroughs are actually doing at the moment to see how that could be scaled up across the region. I know you've got examples from other parts of the country, but I know we've got examples of things that we're doing. And kind of what scope is there to work with stakeholders who aren't probably necessarily in the public sector, but actually private partners who might be able to help us gain that kind of connectivity.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And yeah, absolutely. The damp and mold one actually came through from what Brent's already doing. So yeah, certainly in line with each of the solutions we've selected, we've got a list of where it's been done elsewhere. And in some cases that's in West London, sometimes it's the South London partnership, sometimes it's further afield. So yes, certainly we'll be drawing on those impacts in this work. In terms of the private sector engagement, what we didn't mention here is we have started what we're calling a research network. And that's a collection of, I think, about 30 individuals from public sector, but also private sector organizations that came together. We presented this to them, and they actually came forward with a lot of the solution ideas, and we intend to continue engaging them going forward.
Thanks, Chair. So actually just following on from the two comments previously, I completely agree. The whaling agreements have been really good. It's good to go onto an estate and say, actually, you're now connected, and you can actually use that. That's really powerful stuff. I suppose within that, just taking a sort of very local view, I appreciate big players will be able to provide the connectivity, but what are we doing in terms of enabling, you know, the earlier report that we had talked about lots of small businesses in West London who employ less than 9 people. I would imagine a fair few of those will be technology solutions driven, you know, in the IT sphere. How much are we doing to kind of support those local businesses so that that local economy piece, keeping the money within West London or within boroughs? And then following on from Councillor Tatler's question, I was being cynical, and I'm not being cynical here. But, you know, a lot of these solutions that we're talking about are things that we've been talking about for years and years. And so I wonder, aside from the answer that you just gave, what solutions already exist in the market? Are we looking again at the smaller players who maybe are more niche, more bespoke? And where is the space for sort of innovation if there aren't already solutions to try and help with that? What can we do to try and encourage some of that innovation from West London perspective?
Definitely. So on the first question around kind of micro businesses and the local economy piece, one of the solutions that I didn't talk through is one specifically focused on that. So it's the provision of connectivity for those businesses, but then also appreciating that many of these businesses might not be that digitally advanced, might not even have a website, for example. So we've extended that use case to also include the provision of kind of shared infrastructure, whether that be shared website hosting, a shared payment platform to take online orders, and maybe even a shared logistics function to be able to compete with some larger players and kind of deliver locally, but not having to set up their own infrastructure, which appears to be a major barrier to getting online.
I'll just say something on the innovation piece. So I think part of that is around working with the HEI, local HEI institutions more closely. And also I think there's a role for procuring innovation ourselves and actually going out to the market with a challenge and saying, what can you do to help us solve this challenge, and engaging with business and the supply chain in a different way as well to help, you know, unlock that innovation. So I think once we get towards the end of the modelling, we'll be able to have more idea about where the priorities are and, you know, where's the sort of biggest impacts, I suppose, where's the biggest social impacts from a technology, and how do we access that? And is the technology that's available actually going to help us achieve that social impact, or is there further tech innovation that we should encourage to try and get there? So they're the types of conversations I think we want to get to in this project as well.
Thanks, Chair, and also apologies for my lateness. Linked to that a bit, just in terms of voluntary and community sector, and thinking about for the winter warm hubs, those sorts of activities where people with affordability challenges will be going and therefore are also more likely to be digitally excluded by nature, whether or not there's something we could be doing with the sort of vol sector hubs and those sorts of areas, which I know is always a little bit more tricky to sort of, you know, coalesce. But actually, there's a big win if we can do something around that. So from a Harrow perspective, we can certainly link you in with some of our infrastructure organisations. I'm sure other councils can do the same. But it's just whether or not that's one of the aspects of this, because estates and all those sorts of things is great, and therefore creating the connectivity almost free of charge. There are going to be people in other sort of household settings where ultimately they're not going to get the benefit of the digital infrastructure, but also they're going to have faced cost of living challenges and probably want to be going places where actually they can get more things out of, you know, the one visit than just a cup of tea and a chat and stuff. So it was just whether or not we've got enough time to plan, given the fact that it's warm at the moment rather than it's freezing cold, which it will be in 6 months' time.
Thanks, Simon. Just to say on that, so we have got the site upgrade programme going on in Harrow and other boroughs where we're putting fibre optics up to community centres, up to libraries, etc. And I think it's a really good point to think about what other facilities and other parts of the sort of ecosystem around support needs that connectivity and that support. So it's definitely something we'll take away and talk to your colleagues at Harrow about and the other boroughs. So I think it's a really good point, and it's come up recently again somewhere else.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of things. One is, this is if you like, a long-term project, because will be a continuous role until we don't talk of digital in terms of projects, but in terms of business as usual. So they need to, to have that trained. How confident are you we've got the right, like, funding formula, because obviously the economy changes, inflation and so on, but also technology changes at a quicker pace, and it's the flexibility to be able to introduce new items within this package, or do we need to relook at it? That makes sense.
I might leave funding. Oh, sorry. I might leave funding to Finn, but on terms of the pace of change of technology, I think what we're aiming to do with these solutions is identify the enabling infrastructure underneath them. So whether that be a sensor network, whether that be 5G, whether that be low powered networks, that would form the foundation, and then you could put various things on top of that would allow you to iterate. But yeah, very conscious that technology will change very fast, but hopefully we're going to have a flexible foundation.
Well, yeah, just on the funding point. So I know that some boroughs are looking in detail now about how, there can be efficiency savings and benefits to different technology deployments. And that's been looked at in a lot of the digital strategies that I know the boroughs have developed and are developing. So I think there's part of it's around, how can you incorporate some of these technologies into business as usual? And I think the other source of funding then for this kind of, how do we bridge this? How do we do some more experiments with these technologies to see if those benefits are real? I think that's where we call on GLA, central government funding sources, of which there are DSIT, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, has launched new funding programs aimed at local authorities to innovate with these technologies at the moment. So there is funding out there to help us experiment. And then I suppose it's looking at how we actually adopt them if they're successful, if they're working for residents, working for the borough, and working for officers, then how do we adopt them into the organisations? This a long term, I suppose, is where we go next with these things. But there is funding around at the moment from the Department for Science, Innovation, Technology for innovation with these particular technologies.
And talking about pace of change and sort of the digital scene and the risk of potentially broadening this conversation. I know the region has issues or kind of potentials around infrastructure, particularly around data centers and the impact of how data and information is handled around digital connectivity. And I was just wondering whether, as a wider point on this, do we need as a region or as a board a strategy around how we deal with data centers and the impact it's going to have, because it's something that we absolutely are going to have to rely on. My understanding is currently it's not classed as critical infrastructure, and the way things are moving, it absolutely needs to be. So I don't know whether as a region we need to be thinking as lobbying aspect.
Yeah, I'll take that one because I used to sit on the OPDC planning committee, right? And over a period of sort of like 8 years, we'd see the increasing frequency of data centers. And I remember saying at the first one, look, this is going to take off. Like, it was sui generis, like permission for a big old, bit of warehouse that, had 4 jobs in it when the old one had, something like a couple of hundred, subsumed, the equivalent of a town of 20,000 homes worth of energy all at once. And you could sort of see the slow march towards data centers happening along the fiber optic cables that we're of course blessed to have, but of course it's caused us significant challenges. And so, here we are 8 years later from that initial warning that perhaps we need a bit of planning policy around this. whereby we're now swamped with data centers that have taken up, if you like, all of our future energy network and future energy provision, or at least in terms of its distribution. So I think definitely in terms of it being a piece of critical infrastructure and being viewed in that way, OPDC now thankfully are coming forward with some supplementary planning guidance. But I think what we're also doing is the West London Alliance through the Leaders Board, and I think we're in fact having that conversation, I think next week. You know, we're going to take a paper on some of the a strategic view of what we need to do, both in terms of energy networks, but also on data centers, which is of course the key thing that's driving it. So I think probably we'll have that in due course. But you know, absolutely right. You know, this is as every time that we progress, of course, we always have to catch up with other elements of our creaking Victorian infrastructure, whether that's sewers or data centers. It's all, or even trains. It's all part of the same. It's all part of the same sort of need for a long-term view of investment to West London. But it's an important point. We're going to move to the next agenda item, if that's okay, partly because it's a nice segue into a launch event that we will be having very shortly for the individual placement and support in primary care project. But David, over to you for an update on the WLA employment support services.
Yes, so the paper that was circulated on this really gave an overview of the work that's been done by the WLA employment support team, working with your boroughs to support people into work. And it's actually work that's focused on people who've got some of the most severe barriers into employment. And it also talked about a new programme, which is the individual placement support in primary care. So in terms of the work that we've done, since around about 2018, we've had two really big programmes, the Work and Health Programme and JETS, and some other smaller programmes. And as a result of that work, we've supported 24,000 residents, and 11,000 of those have gone into sustained outcome work opportunities. And as a result of the kind of success we've had in terms of integrating how we work with Shaw Trust, who's our main provider in our boroughs, we were one of only, I think, around about 5 areas in the country who were given pilot funding for the individual placement support in primary care. And that's 5.2 million over the next 2 years to support around about 2,000 people into work. So I think you may be aware that the current government is looking at employment support more generally and bringing out something called universal support. And the jury's out as to the extent to which that's going to continue to be devolved. But actually, the focus of that universal support is on inactive people. So that's people who are not regarded as being unemployed, but some of those inactive people are claiming benefits, and much harder for job centres to engage with. And I think through the services that we've got in local government and our outreach, we're in a real good position to demonstrate with our existing programme and with this new programme how we can work through our services, but also work with the NHS, because there's a lot of kind of the wider determinants, the Marmot review, which highlighted the importance of good work, and we've got to remember we're trying to get good work here. So as Peter says, there's an event proceeding following this meeting, which you're all invited to. But I just wanted to kind of record what we've done, highlight the fact that we've got this new programme of work, and then just stress the importance of the borough teams working to integrate the services across employment support and make sure we get even more people into good work.
Yeah, thank you very much. Unless there's any comments or questions on that, it's an area that we of course do keep on coming back to at this board. And as David says, that the launch event is happening immediately after this. That is why this meeting, if you like, is shorter than usual and truncated in nature. But of course, it won't be the last that you hear of us. I don't think we've got a date for the next meeting, but of course there will very much likely be one. And I hope that you're all there. So thank you very much to those who have attended and presented, and see you upstairs.
Somewhere in here.
Oh, down the corridor. We'll see you down the corridor. Thank you very much.
In the Telfer room.